I've done it again. I'd just like to say there was a delegate who just came to speak to me with a fabulous Mohican haircut. I don't know where you are, saying that he already has a platform and the technology and stuff ready to implement some of this. So a person with a Mohican, there can't be a lot of them. He's the man. Now, we are going to have a panel of the global CEOs because normally during the summit, we don't do this kind of panel, but there's been such huge interest in these great business leaders that we said, okay, we would bring them together, and some of them are specifically going to make speeches or interventions for you. So I just want to bring on the, if you like, the extra people that are joining this panel because it is such an important panel. I'm going to introduce to moderate this session Vasi Naidu, who is a managing partner of Deloitte. He's been with them since 1977. He's a leader in corporate citizenship, and he is also, he's a South African, he's a chairman of the African Children's Feeding Scheme, which feeds some 18,000 people in my hometown of Johannesburg. Welcome, Vasi, please. Also joining is the Director General of the OPEC Fund for International Development, Sulaiman Al-Herbish. You met him last night, but he has just been appointed to the Honorary Senate of the Lindau Foundation Nobel Prize winners, and this is the first time that a person from the Middle East has received this honor. Please welcome him back, Sulaiman Al-Herbish. In the enormous work that has been done over the last year to bring in more African countries and more delegates from Africa, we traveled to many countries asking, and many companies asking, please support the people of Africa. And we went to Munich quite a few months ago to make a presentation at Siemens. And that session was chaired by the person who was at the time the CEO for Africa of Siemens, a young man called Dirk Hoek. And I say a young man because reading in his biography, every single step of his career at Siemens, he's been the youngest at everything. So him and David Jones kind of in the same basket there, and Pekka Hymänen. And Dirk was just absolutely committed. How do we help the African countries? How do we help them get delegates there? So would you please welcome the CEO of the division Industry Solutions, now as he is at Siemens, Dirk Hoek. Over to you, Vasi.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And Kate, thank you so much for inviting me as one of the delegates from Deloitte to chair the session. We've got about 35 or 40 minutes, I've been told. And what we're going to do is ask 3 speakers to make some brief opening comments. And before I invite them to do that, I would just try to summarize what I thought was the advice that you were giving us as CEOs from the kind of takeaways that I heard in the session this morning. And I think the 3 words that came out for me was very powerfully made by the second speaker, which is the ability of us as CEOs to empower, inspire, and connect. I think that's very much in our domain to do, and maybe that's a good takeaway for us to reflect on as we go about our duties. And then the illustration of the power of the consumer and the fact that consumers now are saying this is table stakes. We demand this. And we've got probably the biggest consumer business on the stand here, and hopefully there's some insights around that as well. And then the challenge to move from a culture of minimum compliance to regulation and rules to going beyond the minimum, doing the extra bit and creating that culture in our companies, I think is a very appropriate advice in the current circumstances. The notion of embedding CSR into the business plans and the strategy of our organizations, also very insightful. It's not the responsibility of the corporate manager or the PR people in the organization or indeed HR. It's us, the CEOs, that have to take responsibility for it. The notion of not trying to do all the stuff ourselves and the multi-dimensional approach, the private-public partnerships, working with the NGOs, good advice again. And then the old debate that we've got this morning and this afternoon, and that is how we as CEOs of organizations can make a difference in terms of uplifting the unprivileged, however and whichever way you describe that. And the role of business. What is really, really telling is Walmart is the 23rd largest country in the world in terms of GDP. Just goes to show you that 60% of the world's GDP is driven by 175 companies, I think the stats was. And it does show that we as big business, all business indeed, because business is broadly defined, can make a huge, huge difference. So I think those were fantastic insights, great advice for us to take back to our organizations. And hopefully some of those comments will come out as we have this panel this afternoon. So without much ado, I'm going to go for ladies first and ask Gula to say a few words.
Well, Wasi, thank you. You did summarize very well. Well, I did pick up a lot of ideas. Really, it's great to be here. You have such energy and so many different ideas and thoughts. And I think one of the things that in this world that we need to do more listening and more cooperation. And I have a lot of take-home values from you. But let me just put my thoughts about the whole thing. The last 20 years, I mean, I understand the role of business is increasing. The expectations from all of you, from the world, is increasing from the big businesses. And we are aware of it. I mean, I must talk about my company. I am very proud to say that last year, 2010, Sabancı Holding has been elected as the most reputable corporation in my country by the International Reputation Board. So in general, I come from a culture that in order to lose our reputation, we rather lose business. So that sounds simple, but it has been carried out in my company. I'm the third generation in my family. And so in the old days, I should say, we have started our family foundation at the same time when we started our family corporation. So it was one hand will win, will gain, and the other hand will distribute, will contribute to the society. That was the idea. But now it's evolved. Now in my corporation, it is the culture, as you said, Wasi. It is the culture, and the culture comes, it's the climate. It is wherever you are. The individuals create the culture. And that individuals, wherever they are, they can create that need, being a human being, that need of doing something beyond what you are being paid for. And that is the whole idea. In my corporation now, there are all voluntary works being done in every small town, in every different businesses. And it's the end of the year that we see their voluntary contributions and their results. So the more and more what we talk about, people, planet, profit, triple bottom line. So it's not only the governments, it's not only the businesses, it's not only the institutions. It is beyond that. It is the people. It's the individual. And the focus, and that's what I see here today. That's where we are now. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gula. I'm now going to invite Paul to address us briefly. And I think it's appropriate that we listen to Paul. Just by way of background, I have spent the best part of 50 years of my life in South Africa, having lived through apartheid and the miracle democracy that we've experienced. And I think one of the fundamental things that Unilever did in South Africa, it was that it built leadership. And for that, we owe you a deep sense of gratitude as the South African people. So the table is yours, Paul.
I've been asked to take a little bit more time, but before I give you some of my thoughts, I just want to first congratulate David and his wife, Karine, who actually got the baby. David Jones, he got the baby yesterday. I think that's a round of applause, no? He claims he did a lot of work for it. I don't think so. But thanks to David and thanks to Kate for organizing this wonderful Young World event. It is very clear that there's energy in the room, that I can tell you. If you turn that positive energy into the right direction, boy, can you make change. And being part of that in itself is tremendously energizing. Last year I was in Venice at a conference where someone asked me to speak, and there was a panel. I met actually Ajarat Bade from Nigeria, who I think is here in the audience now. I haven't seen her. But she was talking to me about the 8th missing millennium goal, no wars in the name of religion. Her passion that came through, how she captured the audience, it struck a chord. And then on that same day, I met Oscar Morales, someone you will see later today, a leader who single-handedly got people in the street to protest in Colombia against violence, and in this case, the FARC. 2 leaders taking personal charge, 2 leaders driving change. There's no doubt in my mind that we meet at a very turbulent time. You can open the papers every day. This is a world that is challenged, and these challenges are daunting and numerous. And as you've heard from the questions, it's sometimes difficult to know where to begin and how to start. Never have the issues been more pressing, and never have the needs for leadership been more burning. If you look at the interdependent challenges that we face on food security, poverty reduction, sustainability of resources, climate change, and social and economic and environmental development, these challenges have never been greater. And I believe that these pressures will only increase as about 2 more billion people enter this world, and many aspire to improve their living standards. But there are the risks that we don't end up doing the right things for the long term with the short-term economic pressures that we have. That would be my biggest concern. We call this world, or I would call this world, a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And frankly, we need your help. We cannot do it alone. Advancing the human tide in this world, improving people's standards of living, alleviating poverty that you talk about, is something that we all jointly need to take responsibility for. Historically, we have relied actually too much on governments or international institutions to help us through these tougher times. Not so anymore. I think the financial crisis of 2008 that turned into an economic crisis is actually becoming rapidly a political crisis. The political system or the international institutions, in my opinion, actually have broken down, if you like it or not. Witness how difficult it is to get a Doha round after 10 years of discussions. That in itself would lift 300 million people out of poverty. Witness how difficult it is to make progress on climate change or to get financial stability deals in the current environment. Election cycles have shortened, and I hate to say, so has political courage. With the risk, the bigger risk, that the crucial long-term issues that you are here addressing, that you are going to be part of, will not be addressed sufficiently. But fortunately, as Aaron was talking about, you have the power to shift this. There are some things happening in unpredictable ways, which is the spread of technology. People find themselves increasingly empowered to drive change. From the basic mobile phones to the social platforms, obviously. People are discovering the power of these networks. It's giving them a voice. It's giving them a voice outside of the political sphere. I would argue that a regime in Egypt was toppled in 6 weeks' time as the first example of the social revolution. Earth Hour, which originally started with WWF, as I'm not mistaken, now gets 1 billion people to turn off their lights for 1 day, for 1 hour across the world. 1 billion people. That's nearly 1 in 7 citizens. The power of the social networks. Just like Oscar Morales or President Obama were getting elected as young leaders because they understood the power of this new media. They understood that it would lead to yes, we can. And yes, we can is true for more and more people. But you cannot do it alone, as many of you have pointed out. Business has a role to play, and certainly business has a responsibility. It is very clear that business models need to change first and foremost to drive business models more to a sustainable and equitable growth. And these two words are very important, sustainable as well as equitable. There is a Chinese proverb that says if you don't change direction, we likely end up where we're going. And frankly, where this world is going is not a pretty sight. And if some businesses don't get it, that they have to be part of the solution, I think you're smart enough to use these same social forces that I was talking about to actually make them dinosaurs. The simple power you have is a very powerful power, which is just simply not to buy their products anymore. If you can topple a regime in Egypt in 6 weeks' time, you can topple in today's world a company in nanoseconds. And Libya. Good. Now, for that we need new business models, but we also need new leadership. And let me briefly talk about the two. The first thing is what is very clear, and I hope you would understand that as well, that business has a very important role to play in this world, where growth is very important. You need to create jobs. There are 40 million people coming to this world net of ones that leave every year. They need to be taken care of. You need to create jobs. You need to provide products to improve many people's lives. We've chosen for social systems, rightfully so, like healthcare, education, and others that need to be provided for. In fact, globalization, the right of business to sell and market their products across the world has lifted nearly 1 billion people out of poverty in places like China, India, and many other ones. In the developed economies, where we're here in Europe or the US, it's equally important that the role of business is to provide that growth. In some places, the biggest worry I have is the worry actually of social cohesion, that your generation, I'm not worried about you with your energy, but your generation is getting excluded from society. If you see that youth unemployment in Spain or Greece or many other places is rapidly approaching 40% now, we have a need to reignite growth. We have a need to create jobs and make it inclusive and equitable growth. That is absolutely very, very important. The reason why we need to change, it's very simple to me. It cannot be right in today's world that 1/4 of its inhabitants have literally nothing to live on, and almost 1 in 5 still live in extreme poverty, whilst fewer and fewer people are amassing the wealth. It simply cannot be right that 965 million people go to bed hungry every night, and a child dies every 6 seconds from malnutrition, whilst at the same time another part of the world is over-consuming and is facing escalating rates of obesity. It simply cannot be right that we are consuming the world's scarce resources at a higher rate than the world is able to replenish. In fact, WWF has done a study and already mentions that we live currently off 1.3 Earths already. If we would live like everybody in Europe, you already need 3 Earths. We would live like an American, we would need 5 Earths. And that is before 2 billion more people enter. We simply cannot go on the way we're doing it. Either way, the fact is we only have one world, and we need to take care of that. Business as usual will certainly not get us there, that I can tell you. And business has to increasingly ask themselves the question on how can they play the role to make society better, socially, economically, and environmentally, rather than just how can I maximize profit and minimize costs. I know a lot of businesses work under that premise, but I would say that's not a good business model anymore. Business models, business leaders will need to understand that indeed, with the liberty to operate in many countries in the world, like Unilever, about 150 countries, also comes the responsibility to be co-solution providers for the world's issues. I like Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, who wrote in his book, Man in Search for Meaning, that when they built the Statue of Liberty on the east coast of the United States, they actually forgot to build the Statue of Responsibility on the west coast. These two go hand in hand. And yes, it is enlightened self-interest, but there's nothing wrong with enlightened self-interest. I have 3 children. That's an interest. I cannot keep stealing from them or from future generations. But it's also very clear that businesses themselves cannot succeed in societies that fail. People that are at the bottom of the pyramid, societies that have corruption, are not exactly the most conducive ones for us to sell our products in. Take Unilever. We go back about 100 years or a little bit more. We started when Lord Lever provided soap in Victorian Britain, when hygiene was a big problem. It was to provide a solution. Throughout that, we've done well as the company grew to what is now 45 billion euros, about 170,000 people operating in about 150 countries. We built our business throughout those years by a strong belief of doing well by doing good. A belief that the success of our business is actually deeply linked with the success of the society in which we operate. In fact, you might have seen a recent article of Michael Porter in the Harvard Business Review, beginning of this year, where he talked about shared value, moving away from this single-minded focus on maximizing shareholder value that is still happening way too often, to actually maximizing value for all stakeholders, your people in the company, the communities in which you live and work, the consumers. I've often been quoted by saying that I really don't work for the shareholders. We work for the consumer and for society. And frankly, if we do that well and stay focused on that, I can tell you the shareholders will be rewarded. But the single-minded focus led us to the problems that we saw in 2008 in the first place. So there we go. We have a long history of doing the right things, and hopefully doing the right things, starting the Sustainable Agricultural Initiative or the Sustainable Fishery in the 90s, creating the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil to produce the sustainable palm oil that we have now. By the way, illegal deforestation is 16% of the global warming. You don't need technology. You need to just find a way to stop illegal deforestation. Now, we are encouraged by the progress that we are making. We've decided actually to go a step further and to embrace a radical business model that moves from just reducing the negative impacts to society, where still too many people are focused on, to actually move to how can you make a positive contribution to society. In fact, most companies will operate obviously on the right side of the law, but they will ask themselves, how can I use society and the environment to be successful? We're trying to shift that thinking literally 180 degrees and say, how can we be successful whilst making society and the environment better? And that requires a fundamental change in how you run your business. It requires a fundamental change in the business model. That's what we call the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan that David referred to when he introduced me. We set a very simple goal here. To double our business, you need to grow, but to reduce our overall environmental impact. In fact, decouple growth from environmental impact. Not only carbon, all of it. It's an audacious goal that makes us nervous, but it can be done. I haven't heard any company of our size make that commitment, and yet we need it for more. If we would only succeed, and the rest of society wouldn't, we would still be failing, that I can tell you. We've also said that we want 1 billion people to improve their health and well-being. It's actually more than a single government could provide. A company like ours is able to make that commitment and hopefully live up to that commitment because 2 billion consumers use our products every day. And then a third commitment to source 100% of our agriculturally based materials sustainably. We're committed to do that by the year 2020, and we're well on our way. It takes an approach across the total value chain, from sustainable sourcing to sustainable living. It covers all of our brands, all of our categories. It is the business model. It is the strategy. And it has very specific targets and projects, obviously, behind that anybody can see. Transparency, transparency, transparency is indeed important. And again, technology allows you to access that very quickly, and also in our case. We're working, for example, with Oxfam to look at improving the livelihood, and we've set a simple goal to do that with 500 million farmers. 95% of the poverty actually is in the agricultural sector. Smallhold farmers is a big opportunity there. Or working with WWF or the rainforest to move to sustainable palm oil. The Shakti program in India, Shakti meaning strength. 45,000 women now making their livelihood distributing our products, going to 100,000 by the end of the year. Or the introduction of a water product called Purit, where for 1/15 of the cost, people can get clean drinking water out of any water source, from the rivers in Calcutta to wherever it is, and people need water. 5 million people already having access to this. Or our Lifebuoy product, teaching people how to wash hands. Infectious diseases still kill about 6 million people every year. You can cut that in half just by getting them to wash their hands. So what we call the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan is not an add-on. It is a new business model. But we simply cannot do that alone. We have to do that with everybody together, yourselves and other stakeholders. It also requires a different business environment, much more focused on the long term. The problems of 2008 that we had were as much the problems of short-termism and greed than anything else. We've started to abolish guidance to the market. We don't report anymore on a quarterly basis. We've changed our compensation systems for the long term so that people in our company can focus on doing the right thing for the long term. And what we find actually in doing that there is no compromise in delivering on the short term as well. But it leads you like a lighthouse, like a beacon, to the right decisions to run your business. So this is a fast pace of change that we're seeing in this world, and we certainly have to learn a lot ourselves to also find solutions to these challenges. And this is where you come in, because I think that the young people, you that are represented here, not only are the fast learners, but you also are better in touch with what is happening in society. In fact, I would submit you care a little bit more because you have a lot more time ahead of you than many others of us. You also understand how to bring in fresh ideas. You're not pre-programmed. You have the courage. You have the conviction to help us get to these audacious goals that we set ourselves. The real reason why we want you on the table, at the table, is to help us drive that change. I believe that the world has woken up, for example, to climate change, not just because of a few politicians or scientists, or a movie called The Inconvenience Truth. They all helped, there's no doubt about that. But it was because of the young people, people like you, fearful for their future, that have been demanding change from their parents, from their governments, and from the companies from which they buy products. I'm clear that you play a crucial role in this process. So I like the resolution that you have today, and I certainly would fully support it. Which brings me briefly to the issue of leadership. You cannot do these models if you don't have the leadership. More than ever, we need leaders that are stepping up to the plate to drive this change. It was actually Winston Churchill who famously observed, it simply isn't enough to do our best. Sometimes we have to do what is required. And in this world, we are at a point of no return if we don't do what is required. It requires courage. It also requires what Jim Collins calls authentic leadership. Leaders who operate with a sense of purpose for their work and other pursuits, like you have clearly expressed an enormous sense of purpose. Leaders who know themselves, but also care about others they touch. Leaders who understand the strengths and the flaws of themselves, knowing that they're not perfect, pulling in others to help them reach these broader solutions. Leaders who attribute greatness more to their followers than to themselves, who put the interest of others ahead of their own, who care about this planet indeed with the brain and with the heart. For a company like ours, it simply means putting a CEO like myself at the bottom of the company, not at the top, to the service of others. When people ask me what my job is, I always say very simply, to make others succeed. The definition of a great leader is changing rapidly, just as the traditional barriers of leadership are breaking down. The leader potential, more than ever, is in the hands of people who can access, analyze, and use information strategically, which in fact is you, far better than us. That's the younger generation, able to harness together this enormous collective power that you have. Not surprisingly, we like to tap into that to reach our goals of the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan that I talked about. You're a special group. You're well placed to lead this change. The world needs you, you care. That's why you're here. I've already seen that you have the purpose, the passion, and the positive attitude to succeed. Many of you are already making a difference. The road ahead will certainly not be easy, and it will be full of challenges. But again, once more, running away from that is not an option. Just let me conclude with the renowned poet, David Frost, an American poet, who had his poem called The Road Not Taken. He ends the poem with a very simple thing. 2 roads diverged in a wood. And I took the one less traveled by. And that made all the difference. Good luck in your journeys.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you for the case study, and hopefully listening to the Unilever case study gives you an indication of how things that you spoke about this morning are in fact happening in business, and maybe we should encourage, as you rightly say, to get the list going so more companies do more of what Unilever is doing. Suleiman, I'm going to come to you at the end and just open it up a little bit, if I may. I'll just go to Anthony first. In terms of, as we spoke earlier, the importance of leadership, Paul has mentioned that as well. The speakers earlier talked about authenticity and compassion in leadership. What are your insights around this, and weave in a kind of a Barclays global business perspective, if you can?
Well, I've got really 2 thoughts. The first is, in a very brief reprise of what we discussed yesterday, like Paul, I agree that the problems of the world are greater than the capacity of many of the global institutions that we have to deal with them. So things have to change. And in the world of business, that change is about thinking about all the stakeholders that we serve and taking a much longer term perspective. In my talk, I talked about leadership having to be both relentless and authentic. You used the word authentic, and you used another word, but it's basically the same thing. So what you hear from us in 2 very different industries is exactly the same perception of what we need to do. I'd just like to pick up on a bit of a theme secondarily that has been discussed extensively here about corporate social responsibility, and is that just kind of whitewashing by corporations? And I really see this in 3 ways. I see this firstly as the traditional things that would be in corporate social responsibility, like charitable donations. At Barclays, we give about $100 million a year around the world. Volunteerism by our staff. We have 150,000 people in Barclays. Over 50% of them volunteer every year. Things like sustainability, environment, climate change. I'd say that was the first bucket. The second bucket is the way you do business. Can you create business models that solve problems in society? And I think there, particularly of work we're doing in South Africa with entry-level banking, where we're creating very low-cost, technologically based bank accounts that can be distributed across the rural parts of South Africa, because we know that there's a close correlation between access to banking and economic growth. And then the third and most important thing, and again it mirrors some of Paul's comments, is what I described yesterday as being a force for good. And this is applying the lens of the impact that a business has in society to all its actions. And I fundamentally believe that every business at some point will reach a decision where it may need to do something that has a neutral impact on society, and in some cases, a negative impact. The example I always like is carbon. We all flew here today. We all created carbon doing that. There is no way to deal with that problem. You can buy carbon credits to offset that. Personally, I just think that's not a solution at all. I think that's just a blind alley, buying carbon credits. But as a business, we're going to create carbon. We can minimize business travel. We can use business video conferencing, all of those things. The most important thing is to look at all the decisions we take at every level in our business and say, is that good for society? If it is, fine. Can we make it better? Is it neutral? Can we make it good? Is it detrimental? Can we minimize that detriment? Can we make it neutral? And in business, many of you are involved in business. Business is a very analytical, process-driven, results-oriented type of activity. We need that same discipline in this arena when we apply the notion of force for good. You had different language, but it was the same concept to all of the decisions we take at every level in the organization. Then we really will start to move the needle on this one.
Anthony, terrific. Thank you very, very much. Another good example. Staying with that theme, I'm going to move to another global business, which is Dirk, and ask you to comment about how Siemens does it, what your experience has been, for example, in Africa. There was a comment from the floor earlier around releasing the bureaucracy in the developing countries. You know, Siemens is a big business. You guys go to where people dare to go. Some insights in terms of how you guys do this.
Yeah. First of all, I'm very glad to be here today because it's the birthday of my daughter and the first declined. And then I asked my daughter, would you mind if I go on a business trip to meet some very important people, very talented people? And I explained to her, this is exactly where I show you the video about the meeting in London and about people that really want to impact the world and create a better world. And after that she said, of course, Dad, you can go. And this is why I'm here today, despite the birthday of my daughter. And I'm very glad to get a chance not to give you a business presentation about Siemens. I think you know enough about Siemens. Just to give you some personal comments on what I heard today about the resolution, because I think it's brilliant. It is a great approach in order really to bring business and NGOs, people like you, together in order to create a better world. And in Africa, I learned my lessons. I spent 3 years of my life there. I expected it would be much more than that, but I got new opportunities. But spending in Africa 3 years, going there and getting all the feedbacks from the colleagues, why you're taking that, why you're accepting it, you have such a great career, you have such a good job, why you're going to Africa? Africa was not on the spot for Siemens. And I told them that it's a great opportunity. There are massive changes going on in Africa, and we have to change the bad perceptions. Because mostly the opinions about Africa are driven from a few people that have never set foot on the ground in Africa. They had read newspapers, they have heard about poverty, crisis, war, child warriors, about corruption. This was, of course, one of the biggest questions I always get. How are you going to do to develop the business in Africa if you find most of the countries on the corruption perception index below 140? So what are you doing to do in order to make clean business? And we definitely proved in the few years already that it's possible. We developed the business very fast. We concentrated on developing the local competence, concentrate on the local people. And if you have worked with the people in Africa and you see the fascination, the engagement, the motivation to change, to bring the business and the countries to the next level of development, that's really fascinating. It's inspiring. It inspired definitely me as a leader, and we changed the perception of Africa within the Siemens global business completely. Just to give you an example, it was also successful because we grew just by changing from an opportunistic approach to a strategic approach. We grew in the first year by 44%. So we have 3,000 people there, great people. They deserve a chance to become more visible. And definitely we see also on the other side a very fast business growth ongoing. So, but this is only possible with sustainable business.
Correct.
So definitely, as you have triggered in many of your statements, we can only achieve it by being transparent, by concentrating on local competence, education, training to create strong competence on the ground and develop it from there. And this is what we have done worldwide. That's one of our prediction, one of our initial part of our DNA. As already our founder, Werner von Siemens, said, he will not risk the future of our company for short-term profit. And this is, I'm very proud to work for such a company that concentrates really on a long-term sustainable approach. And we are today working in almost 200 countries. We are local people. We are doing global business, but we are successful on a local base. And this is something we will continue to develop. And I'm really happy to get more engaged with the Wangyang community in order to develop business worldwide, because I think it's very important when you work day by day, very concentrated on your business goals, that you have this interchange to see and realize how many other important topics in the world there are where you can have an impact as a company, as a multinational company. And it's definitely something that we will continue to support.
Thank you, Dirk. So I think that the key point around the bureaucracy, because I've worked a lot in Africa as well, that Dirk says you've got to be in the country to know how to work the bureaucracy. Don't use bureaucracy as an excuse not to engage and not to go, right?
Definitely. Bureaucracy is in some countries still, there's still room for improvement, but there are definitely many opportunities, and you can develop business everywhere, anytime, and you just need to be on the ground to understand the people.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Graham and ask you to comment around the community engagement side of things, because that's come up as a key point as well. And how do we do it at Shell? What kind of ideas can you throw out?
That's a good challenge, isn't it? So I think probably the answer is not as well as we'd like, and that I carry a number of those scars myself, particularly from some recent engagements in the climate change space. I think it was broadly true that we know what we should do, which is the same as the advice you've just given, which is you have to go to the place and you have to talk to the people who are engaged in the activities that you want to undertake. But, you know, I think that you've also got to recognize that you need to be able to articulate what's the benefit for the place where you want to do stuff. And too often we articulate this rather poorly, either in terms of some lofty, ambitious intellectual goals that we're trying to achieve, and rather less in terms of things that make a concrete difference for the people themselves. And so one of my recent learnings is that you've got to do a lot more of that kind of work. I think this is particularly true in two senses now, because the first is that as we've articulated, the size of the challenge gets bigger. The scope of our institutions to deliver seems to be diminished. Our appetite for risk, financial, political, and commercial, is greatly reduced. The kind of engagements that we're talking about, I think, are necessary to re-establish the willingness to take some of those risks. So this is, in a sense, buying down that perceived risk from the response of civil society. The second bit is to rise to Bob Geldof's challenge from last night, which is that the scope and nature of these things requires a level and an intensity of collaboration that is alien to almost all of the participants. We just don't like it. We've got to be accountable to a set of people for the things that we do, but I have to collaborate with you in order to get the answer that I want. I don't like the feel of that. We have to move to a place where we not only like the feel of it, but we embrace that as the way in which we do the work. And this kind of collaborative process will create a hugely different solution set. So we work a lot in that mode in the zero emissions play. It's very difficult. People keep moving around in front of you. But that's the nature of collaboration. Yeah. Nobody gets exactly what they want, but everybody gets an awful lot more than they would have got if they'd stood out for the thing that they want themselves.
Thank you. Very well said. And Mark, if you would comment again on similar kind of issues, but taking into account what we heard from the audience, it's not just about big business, it's not just about global business, but give a perspective from an entrepreneur's point of view, the owner-managed business, private business, because it equally applies, I believe, this agenda to them as well.
Thank you. I think it does. I mean, on the point of listening, I was hoovering up some of the questions or points that people wanted to make when the microphones were shut down. And I think there are a couple of interesting themes there which repeated some of the earlier comments. So there was an issue around how to mobilize social investment. There was another issue around corporate social responsibility and double or triple or, even from Erin's point of view, quadruple bottom line. And I have to say, I'm not a fan of anything other than one bottom line. And that's partly for the same reason that I don't like corporate social responsibility as a department or as a term. It implies it's something else, it's over there, it's additive, it is not integrated. Investment in social responsibility and impact is part of your overall cost structure as a business. It is there before the bottom line. It is both an investment and a cost. And I think any organisational approach which separates that out is starting from a very difficult position. And picking up on the points that Graham just made, I think it becomes then a very difficult conversation amongst organisations who wish to partner and collaborate on how to agree that there are parts of their agenda which can be delivered, as opposed to all trying to get each of their agendas delivered, because that is impractical and it's not the world that I understand or I come from. We're 20 years old in 7 days as an organisation. There was 2 of us when we started out, and we now employ just short of 4,000 people, and we've helped about 1 million people over the course of the past 20 years on their route out of poverty, unemployment, and into work, and most importantly, self-sufficiency. You met one of my customers yesterday, a lovely girl from Doncaster called Kelly, and Kelly was absolutely terrified to come here and talk to you and share her story. So you can give her a shout today so she can hear you in Doncaster. Just give her another little round of applause, because she was so terrified. Thank you. We'll see if she can hear that one in Doncaster. So what you seek to achieve and the energy and passion that I see from the delegates here today is phenomenal. What I don't necessarily see is people that want to mobilize organizations that are both commercial and social. So we're a social purpose company. We have commercial principles and they are strong, and we have social values and they are crucial. And we can't deliver one without the other. It's the nature of what we do. A common theme amongst the speakers earlier was the importance for government, NGOs, mutual organizations and business and the financial sector to work together. And there has to be that consensus developed around the interface between those organizations. Sit on the sidelines, throw stones, lobby, advocate change, campaign. I'm all up for that. But for God's sake, go out, do something and make a difference. Just do it. I was interested about the point on process. Process is around eradicating risk. You can never eradicate risk. Your processes in the organizations you found must walk towards risk and find ways of dealing with it. Because the communities I work with, both in the UK and internationally, those consumers don't have a voice. It's not just about listening, they don't have a voice. So we need to find a way of both mobilizing their voice, then listening, then designing service and social interfaces in order to make sure that we can deliver the type of change and the type of corporate and social impact that's been talked about today. The one area where I'll focus the next 25 years of my career is changing the way the investment and the finance community thinks about that. So if you're considering your careers, if you don't know what you want to do, then you also need to be leaders of industries, you need to be entrepreneurs, you need to lead the NGOs. We need political leaders. And we also need new leaders and new people coming through the financial sector. Because the idea of investing and bringing debt and equity to play in these risky spaces, in developing economies, and taking a chance and a risk on that, and iterating your way to success, is the future of the organisation. As Graham said, it's a moving beast, and you have to be able to work in that environment to make a difference. And I really call on the people in this room to go out and do something. By all means criticise, by all means challenge, but mobilise yourselves. And that connectivity that you have, Bob's point from yesterday, is absolutely unique. There has never been a generation which has been able to connect business and government and consumers and society in a way that you will be able to do so. So please take that call to action up and please do something special with it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, we're going to ask Suleiman to make some closing comments. He's over to you.
Now, I know the trick. If you want to speak longer, you go to the podium. Good afternoon, everybody. And it's really a privilege to be here with you. This morning, a lady shook hands with me, and she said, you are the boss of the three fantastic ladies, referring to the presentation you attended or you listened to yesterday from my three colleagues. So please give them a big hand, please. I'm here to share with you some experiences, one from the past and one from the present. It's really a privilege, as I said, and I would like just to take you back when I was in your age, when I was young, when I was a student. I was in Cairo University in the first part of the 60s, and one of our professors distributed to us a document which is probably the most important global document until the present time. This is the Charter of the United Nations. And this professor later on became the 6th Secretary General of the United Nations. He's Dr. Boutros Ghali. I'm sure you heard about him. And he's the one who lost his chance for another term because he kept faith with the provisions of his mandate in this document. Now, this document actually is important because it is, in some aspect, it is really addressing your situation. It starts by the preamble, which says, we, the people of the United Nations, determined, and it said, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Succeeding generation, you, referring to you. And then it's about talking about faith in fundamental human rights and establishing conditions under which justice and respect prevails, and then to promote social progress and better standard of life. This is something that was done in the mid-40s, long time ago. Now, this standards of living and social justice was more elaborated in chapter 9 in the same document, where it's talk about higher standard of living, full employment, and all these, economic indicators which you hear from time to time. Unfortunately, chapter 9 in this document was overtaken by chapter 7, which I'm sure most of us remember very well because it is the chapter that is actually elaborating on military interventions and economic sanctions. Anyway, this is the first experience I wanted to share with you. At that time, just to be fair with the United Nations, at that time, I think the main threat to the world was war, was global war, because the world was just emerging from two severe wars, and so the main concern was war. Nowadays, I think we have, probably we can say, hopefully, that the threat of a global war is not with us, but there are, of course, these regional wars will stay with us. Now, the challenges facing the world, and this is where I take you to the present, the challenges which are facing the world are many, but I may summarize them in three, which are terrorism, poverty, and corruption. And they are all interrelated and correlated. As we are talking today, you heard to one of our delegates, the gentleman from Malaysia, who was giving some numbers. I would like to add to them. he spoke about those people living in less than $1 a day or $2 a day. I can also speak about countries which I visited in a mission as part of my work in OFID, and they are living in consuming. I visited countries in Africa where the consumption of clear water does not exceed 20 liters. 20 liters is 80 glasses of a standard glass which you have. This is for everything, for washing, for cooking, for drinking, etc. And this is compared to more than 300 liters, the world standards. Then we have, as we are talking now, we have 1.6 billion people deprived from electricity. And this is why we are now putting energy for the poor as one of our priorities. And we have also, as we are here now, we have 2.5 billion people using biomass for their fuel, and 1.5 million, according to WHO statistics, 1.5 million ladies and children dying because of this inhaling the smoke. And by the way, when you want to define poverty, please don't listen to economists. The per capita, this is a myth, because per capita income as a measurement of wealth is really an arithmetic equation. Doesn't mean much to me, and I don't think doesn't mean much to many even big economists like Stiglitz and others, because it's just dividing the value by the population, and you assume that people are receiving the same income, which is not true. If you want to, I see many people from our countries, Arabs, and I always would like to refer them to Tawfiq al-Hakim, an Egyptian playwright, in his novel, The Diary of an Attorney General in the Countryside. And by the way, it is translated to more than 40 languages, I believe. And one of the best translations is found in any library. This is his experience when he was describing the countryside in Egypt and how poverty is prevailing. This is something. It's like when we talk about what's happening in Egypt. I don't know, is Wael Ghunaim here? Wael, are you here? But he's not in the room. No, because I was also in London in a panel, and it was somebody asking me how do you describe what's happening in Egypt. And I told him, if you like to know what's happening in Egypt, go and read the Najib Mahfouz trilogy. Najib Mahfouz is also a Nobel Prize winner. He's the one who described the growth of the middle class and the aspiration, which actually showed in Tahrir Square. Anyway, let me go back to my subject, because I know that using the podium doesn't give me the absolute right to speak. Now, these three challenges which I enumerated, terrorism, poverty, and corruptions, are global. And you need a global solution to solve them, or to resolve them, or to act on them. And by the way, when you say corruption, for example, people think that corruption just belongs to one category of people. And sometimes they even do some labeling that this is Wolfenson, the former director, Wolf Wolfenson, the former director of the World Bank, always describe it in a better way. He always says that bribery, for example, which is the best manifestation of corruption, is an equation of two sides. There is the donor, there the receiver. So it's always, have this kind of definitions. We in OFID, my institution, 35 years ago, our countries decided to share their resources with their fellow developing countries in more than 100 developing countries. And now we are completing 35 years in business. We financed more than 3,000 transactions or operations across the globe. We go everywhere, regardless of religion or region or ideology or whatever. And we have a success story that we would like to share with you. We are happy with what we are doing, and the reason is that we are not politicized. We have no conditions. We do not impose the project on the recipient. We do it. And we take also initiatives like capacity buildings and energy for the poor. And sometimes when we talk about social responsibilities, I did not really dwell on that subject because actually it is the core business of my institution. It's not something that we are adding or we are doing it as a supplemental to what we are doing. It is the core business of OFID social responsibilities because we are doing it to help our fellow developing countries in different parts of the world. And the difference, we are doing a lot of business with corporations. Recently, we did a grant with the Shell Foundation in Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, and we are actually planning to do more. But the difference between us and the corporations is that, you know, when we have the financial crisis, which is actually crippling the world nowadays, and one of the partners, one of the recipients of our assistance, had their rating dropped from B to triple C's. In that month or that 2 weeks, actually, we signed 2 agreements with them. In other words, we stand by our partners when they have a problem rather than to back away from them. And this is the difference. I think I have to conclude, but if you allow me, Mr. Chairman, just half a minute to address the young delegates. I think really sometimes I believe that you know much better than us. You are ready, but just if you allow me to draw your attention to a point which I think you heard about the Millennium Development Goals, the 8. And you heard my colleague telling you that there is a missing goal, which is energy for the poor, eradication of energy poverty, and that's the one we took since 2007. We increased our involvement from 19% over the years to 26%. From November 2007 until now, we financed 37 energy projects in 24 developing countries, and we are doing more. Anyway, the one that is the goal, the 8th goal that I think is a part of your responsibilities is the partnership, where you can influence your government, politicians, or whatever, because this is how we can work together and do it. And I will conclude by giving just an advice. I was talking to Wael, and I told him that I just read a book recently about power, and I told him there was an advice which I would like to pass for you. And this is, if you have a target, so this is whether it is or anywhere, if you have a target and you reach that target, stop there. Don't try to exceed it. Otherwise, this will backfire. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for listening to us. I hope you got some insights from the older statesmen on the floor here in terms of how people like Gula and the older men on the stage have done it before and continue to do this good work. The connectivity from the last speaker around, and I was surprised it wasn't mentioned, the whole issue of dealing with corruption, because you can't solve the poverty crisis without making sure that the monies that are assigned to the creation of jobs and alleviation of poverty goes into the right buckets and channels. And of course, terrorism is a key part of our life as we go forward. So once again, thank you, panelists. And it's been
huge
fantastic.
round of applause for the panelists.